Now, Rishi Sunak told MPs that he would rebuild public finances in a fair and compassionate way. But now the details of those plans won't be revealed for over 3 weeks. In a combative encounter with the Labour leader at his first Prime Minister's questions, the new Prime Minister defended his decision to reinstate Suella Braverman as Home Secretary just days after she resigned over a breach of security. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
So what did we learn day one? We saw one policy of Liz Truss's absolutely dropped. She wanted to bring back fracking, and Rishi Sunak says we're going back to the ban on fracking. He didn't sound very keen on onshore wind. Liz Truss had been sniffing around it. He said, as you said, that the pensions triple lock might be considered for a cut in the review of spending. I'm not 100% sure that they'll really go down that route, but it does sound from talking to ministers as though the idea of the target of defence spending going up to 3% by 2030, that sounds like that might be a goner. And also it sounds like in some form the 0.7% GDP commitment to aid, it looks like that is going to be snipped. We also had the first cabinet. And remember, this is a very unusual type of cabinet he's trying to do. He's trying to bring in all the groups that hate each other inside the Tory party into one room in the hope that their friends and allies outside behave better. It's a sort of version of the Whitehall version of the Afghan lawyer Jirga. And it went smoothly today, but there's a lot of trouble ahead. And when we had his first Prime Minister's questions, a more polished production, it's fair to say, than his predecessor, but we got a true sense of just how many problems there are, how many economic problems there are coming very soon down the track. A dagger's drawn for months. Chiefs of the warring Tory tribes now meet around Rishi Sunak's cabinet table. He hopes they'll hammer out agreements in the room, cool off rebellions amongst their factions. Rishi Sunak warned the cabinet that painful spending decisions lie ahead. He's expected to rein in on promised defence spending, overseas aid and much else. But it was Suella Braverman's appointment as Home Secretary, only 6 days after she'd been dismissed from that job for a security breach,
Prime Minister,
that led on his first Prime Minister's question time.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
Have officials raised concerns about his decision to appoint her?
Mr. Speaker, I just addressed the issue with the Home Secretary. There are over 15,000 new police officers on our street. And the Home Secretary will be supporting them to tackle burglaries.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I listened carefully. That was clearly not a no.
Rishi Sunak signalled he was abandoning Liz Truss's policy exploring fracking and was returning the party to its blanket ban. Onshore wind, he signalled, was now out of favour again too. He was pressed on whether the non-dom tax status his wife used to enjoy should be abolished.
I don't need to explain to the Prime Minister how non-dom status works. He already knows all about that. It costs the Treasury £3.2 billion every year. Why doesn't he put his money where his mouth is and get rid of it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been honest. We will have to take difficult decisions to restore economic stability and confidence. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set that out in an autumn statement in just a few weeks.
Some Conservatives hope that answer could signal the party will move against non-doms and close down a Labour line of attack. One ingredient potentially in the autumn statement, now postponed for 2.5 weeks, in part so the government can factor in the lower cost of borrowing now that Liz Truss has left office.
The market now believes that we've got Hunt, we've got Sunak in charge, and they understand that at this period they need to have a prudent fiscal outlook. They're not going to issue a lot of unfunded tax cuts. So from that point of view, the cost of borrowing has come down.
Could cut the cost of borrowing by about 10 billion, give him back 10 billion he'd otherwise not have?
I find that a perfectly plausible number, yes. And of course that's a great help.
How many multiples of that do you think Liz Truss would have cost us if she'd carried on in number 10?
Well, I think if she'd carried on in number 10 and carried on having the sort of bright ideas, we would have seen things probably deteriorate further.
Leadership is not selling fairy tales. It is confronting challenges, and that is the leadership the British people will get from this government.
Official number 10 photos were issued to show how the new cabinet is getting on famously. They've given themselves 3 weeks to find around £35 billion to fill the black hole. The smiles may have faded a bit by then.
Gary Gibbon. Well, the government's plans for tax and spending will now be unveiled 2.5 weeks later than expected. What do they need the extra time for? Our economics reporter Neil MacDonald is with me now. Why?
Well, the government has got to find tens of billions of pounds of savings. And the reality is one big choice is not going to deliver that. So instead it's having to look at a whole series of options, all of which are going to be equally controversial. So we still don't have any official forecasts, but the best estimate from the Institute for Fiscal Studies is that the government needs to find £62 billion of savings to bring government debt under control in 5 years' time. Reversing the Liz Truss budget saves about £32 billion. That leaves the other half. So, for example, the government could decide to increase pensions and working age benefits in line with earnings rather than inflation. That saves you £11 billion, but of course it means that millions of people see a real cut in their incomes, and you've still only filled 1/3 of that gap.
And what's the point of delaying the moment of truth?
Delay may just help to make the public finances look a little bit better.
Okay.
Take, for example, gas prices. So when the Office for Budget Responsibility does its forecasts for the economy, it has to make an assumption about gas prices, and it bases that on what's been happening to gas prices in the few days before it publishes its report. Now, here in the UK, wholesale gas prices have actually been tumbling since August. If you look at the average gas price in the first couple of weeks of October, it's 290 pence a therm. And that's the sort of price that would have gone in to the OBR forecast if we were going to see it next Monday. Since then, it's carried on falling. It's now about 200 pence a therm. So it's like down by a third.
Yeah.
Exactly. And therefore, by delaying the point at which the OBR forecasts are set in stone, there's just a chance you can build in, for example, a lower gas price, and that could save the government a lot of money because, of course, it's currently guaranteed gas prices for every household in the country.
All eyes on the Bank of England, I think 3rd of November. What does this do to interest rates?
Yeah, exactly. The idea was that the government's plans would be out just before the bank took that decision on interest rates next Thursday. And there was a thought that if the government unleashed a big squeeze on the economy, that might reduce pressure on the Bank of England to put up interest rates. Now the order of the decisions has been swapped around. However, I think the reality is the Bank of England, like everyone else, can see the direction of travel here, even if they don't know the exact numbers. And if there is a big squeeze on government tax and spend policy, then that is going to squeeze the economy and also presumably reduce inflationary pressure.
Neil MacDonald, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to Helen Whately, Conservative MP for Faversham and Mid Kent, who served as Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor. And I started by asking her whether she'd been offered a job.
Well, no, I haven't. But I will say, look, I've worked with Rishi alongside him in the Treasury.
So you should be offered a job.
No, but what I wanted to say, actually, having worked alongside him in the Treasury, and I've supported him before in the leadership contest in the summer, and so actually I'm feeling a huge sense of relief now that he is bringing stability and a real focus as our new Prime Minister.
You keep talking about the 2019 manifesto, but Rishi Sunak's rise in the national insurance, that broke the manifesto promise of 2019. So there's an example of a manifesto promise actually broken by the man now in charge.
Well, no, he took a decision, clearly, and Boris Johnson was Prime Minister back then, but the thing that underpins that is what Rishi Sunak talked about through the leadership, contest in the summer, which is that commitment to fiscal responsibility. So he's absolutely determined that we should balance the books. And in fact, something he said to Keir Starmer and PMQs earlier today was he's not about fairy tale economics.
Right.
He will put country first, and that does include economic stability.
Okay, we have been told today that this much-awaited autumn statement has been delayed by almost 3 weeks.
Well, it makes sense, given the importance of it, for the Prime Minister to have a bit of time with the Chancellor, clearly, because otherwise it was going to be on Monday. So it makes sense to take a bit of time to get it right. What we know is the country and the economy need stability.
Is this autumn statement going to be his statement or Jeremy Hunt's statement?
Well, from what I've always seen, is these sort of things that involve very close working between a Chancellor and a Prime Minister. And what you've seen already from the cabinet that Rishi Sunak has put in place is it brings together people with experience.
But if you look at the cabinet, it looks frankly recycled. The only genuinely new appointment is Jeremy Hunt, and that was done by Liz Truss. And if you look at the rhetoric in the House of Commons today, after the initial niceties that lasted about 13 seconds, it was straight out of Boris Johnson's playbook against the Labour Party. All the old arguments.
The fact is, there are some of the things which were the case in the last couple of years and actually still are the case. So it still is the case that Keir Starmer supported Jeremy Corbyn to stand at the last general election, and all Jeremy Corbyn's crazy
you supported
economic
Boris Johnson
policies.
at one stage,
So,
who was drowned out of your
but
party.
I stood on the
of your
2019 manifesto, and I still stand by that. Keir Starmer stood on Labour's manifesto back then, and there's all sorts of U-turns since then from Labour. So actually these arguments do stand, they're completely valid.
But the world has changed, and the 2019 manifesto was concocted in a different era when there was more money around, and you simply can't afford to come good on all the promises that you've made. So I just wondered, finally, someone who used to work at Treasury, you know about numbers, you know about money, what's going to get cut?
I can't possibly preempt something that is going to be set out and the whole fiscal plan coming up on November the 17th. But what I can say, as was reiterated by the Prime Minister in PMQ today, is that continued commitment to deliver on the 2019 manifesto, the thing that we were elected to do, the things that people want, whether it's a better NHS, whether it's better schools, it's opportunities across the country, environment and controlling borders and levelling up. All these things are still so important.
And we're all grown up, so can you level with us? This will be painful, won't it? And the pain will last for years.
So, again, not a question that I can answer, but what
I'm not
I can
asking
say,
about specifics.
because
Give me some indication of pain.
Well, what we have seen, Rishi Sunak, through the leadership campaign in the summer, was absolutely straight with people. He said he was going to say it as it was. He said that things were going to be tough on the economy, that it was really important to control inflation, that we needed to balance the books. And he said that even though what we saw is actually a big tax-cutting message was more popular at the time. But actually, he wasn't prepared to say what was just popular. He was really determined to say what was right. And that is something I'm absolutely confident he will do as Prime Minister. He'll be straight with us, and he is bringing back integrity.
And meanwhile, you're still waiting to get a job in the cabinet. Okay. Helen Whately, thank you very much. Now, the news that fracking is once again off the agenda has, of course, been welcomed by environmental campaigners across the country. It is also music to the ears of many people and communities located above the shale gas deposits that fracking seeks to exploit. So how's it going down with MPs? Our reporter Amelia Jane is here. How is it going down?
Well, it was only last Thursday night, which may seem to all of us like a million years ago now, that inside there in Parliament, MPs were in total disarray. A huge row erupting between them and the then Liz Truss government over her plans to end the ban on fracking. There were even accusations that some MPs were strong-armed into the voting lobbies to vote with her, although now we know they needn't have wrestled with their conscience. Today, fracking is once again banned, as it was in 2019. It was then a key manifesto pledge of Boris Johnson. The new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, today spoke in Prime Minister's Questions, his very first, and said that fracking was once again banned.
Things change every day here, but one has to ask, why did she ever, Liz Truss that is, why did she ever bother bringing it back on the agenda?
Well, the 2019 manifesto said that fracking could only go ahead if it was categorically proven scientifically to be safe. But last week, Liz Truss's team spoke to us. They told us, look, we're in an energy crisis. We need to build up our domestic supplies. This is all sort of part of the growth agenda. But the reality is, it would have taken years before we could have reaped the benefits. Local communities would would have had to have given their consent for it to go ahead. And it wasn't really just environmentalists who were upset with this. It was Tory MPs, many of them in seats in the Midlands and North, that fracking companies have their eyes on for licences.
Amelia Jen, thanks very much indeed.